Dear viewers, today we are going to discuss three waves of feminism. Feminism is a social movement that advocates for economic, political, and social equality between men and women. It believes that women are systematically oppressed. It also challenges ideas of gender and sex roles, which are the hallmarks of patriarchal society. The movement of feminism is normally divided into three phases or waves. The first wave started in the 19th century and continued into the 20th century. The second wave started in the 1960s and the third wave started in the 1990s. The first wave refers mainly to women's suffrage movements of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The second wave is marked by women's liberation movement beginning in the 1960s, and the third wave was a continuation of the second wave. It began in the 1990s. First wave of feminism refers to an extended period of feminist activity during the 19th century and early 20th century in the United Kingdom and United States. It aimed at promoting equal contract and property rights for women. It also opposed chattel marriage vehemently. The term chattel marriage is a form of marriage in which a husband owned his wife and any children of their union in a legal relationship similar to that of slavery. By the end of 19th century, women's suffrage became the main focus of the first wave of feminism. Consequently, women were given the right to cast their vote. In 1918, women were enfranchised in Britain for the first time under the Representation of the People Act. Activists like Voltaire de Cleyre and Margaret Sanger were vociferously demanding women's sexual, reproductive, and economic rights. The second wave of feminism. The second wave of feminism started in the early 1960s and continued to the late 1980s. It was a continuation of the first wave, and it was largely concerned with issues of equality. It aimed at putting an end to gender discrimination. The feminist activist Carol Haney said, "The personal is political." It implied that women's cultural and political inequalities were interlinked. Now we shall discuss some important texts related to feminism which were produced during the second wave. Number 1. The Second Sex. The Second Sex is a detailed analysis of women's oppression in male-dominated society. It was written by Simone de Beauvoir in 1949. Her analysis focuses on the social construction of woman as the other. In this connection, she said, "One is not born a woman but becomes one." She argues that women have been considered deviant by society, and even feminist writers like Mary Wollstonecraft think that they are incomplete without men. She disapproves of this kind of attitude. Number 2. The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique is widely regarded as one of the most influential books of the 20th century. It was written by Betty Friedan in 1963. It ignited the contemporary women's movement in 1963 and permanently transformed the social fabric of the United States and countries around the world. The writer is of the view that women have succumbed to a false belief system which makes them think that they can only fulfill themselves through childbearing and child rearing. Such a system deprives them of their true identity. Number 3. Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. This book was produced by the African American feminist Gloria Young Watkins in 1984. In this book, the writer criticizes the women's liberation movement of the 1960s. She said that this movement glossed over race and class and thus failed to address the issues that divided women. She highlighted the lack of minority voices in the women's liberation movement. The third wave of feminism began in the early 1990s. It seeks to challenge the second wave's essentialist notions of femininity, which overemphasized the experiences of upper middle class white women. The third wave is marked by a post-structuralist interpretation of gender and sexuality. It re-examines the assumptions of second wave feminism, which impose certain restrictions on women. The third wave feminists sometimes differed as to the differences between the sexes. Some of them believed that there are important differences between the sexes. On the other hand, many of them asserted that there were no inherent differences between the sexes. They also claimed that gender roles were the product of social conditioning. Another term which is closely related to third wave feminism is post-feminism. It incorporates the important assumptions of all the previous waves of feminism and also deals with the drawbacks of second wave feminism. According to some contemporary feminists, feminism simply implies that women are people. In this regard, they say that the views which separate the sexes rather than unite them are considered by these writers to be sexist rather than feminist. In her book Blacklash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, Susan Folody argues that a backlash against second wave feminism in the 1980s has successfully redefined feminism through its terms. She argues that it constructed the women's liberation movement as a source of many of the problems alleged to be plaguing women in the late 1980s. She also argues that many of these problems are illusory, constructed by the media without reliable evidence. McRobbie believes that post-feminism is most clearly seen on so-called feminist media products such as Bridget Jones's Diary, Sex and the City, and Ally McBeal. Female characters like Bridget Jones and Carrie Bradshaw claim to be liberated and clearly enjoy their sexuality. But what they are constantly searching for is the company of some sincere person who would exercise a positive influence on their lives. To conclude, it can be said that the movement of feminism has altered predominant perspectives in the wide range of areas within Western society, ranging from culture to law. Feminist activists have campaigned for women's legal rights, rights of contact, property rights, voting rights, for women's right to bodily integrity and autonomy, for abortion rights, and for reproductive rights. These rights also include access to contraception and quality prenatal care, for protection of women and girls from domestic violence, sexual harassment, and rape, for workplace rights, including maternity leave and equal pay, against misogyny, and against other forms of gender-specific discrimination against women. Thank you very much.